How dangerous do you think was the conflict on Saturday? Of course, more than 30 people were being killed, and many suggest this is the one with the heaviest artilleries being used ever since the armistice.
Exactly. It seems to be the heaviest incident, the heaviest fighting in 22 years. Of course, in a situation like this, it's very difficult to speculate because there is a certain mechanism on the ground of escalation. So one side says it's ceasefire, but then doesn't stop fighting, so the other side responds. So it is serious. On both sides, we had a very aggressive, bellicose statement at the very beginning. So hopefully we will go towards de-escalation, but I can't really exclude the possibility of this escalating into something much more dangerous.
Of course, it immediately attracted the attention, the world's spotlight. But at this moment, both sides claim they have already de-escalated the tension. They have already subscribed to the ceasefire, at least from their side. But nobody knows exactly what is going on over there, because this could be quite a tricky issue to figure out which from which.
Yes, exactly. Even now, just like you mentioned, both sides announced there will be some de-escalation, especially from Azerbaijan, just have a unilateral ceasefire to this conflict. But so far, I think that there will be more problem even, because as we heard, this continue. I mean, for this conflict, the problem is I think that. It's difficult to say who will trigger the first shot on this conflict. But I think, firstly, as we know, there's a long history behind this conflict. Even there is, unended conflict since the last century. And even in the last year, it was reported there were nearly 3,000 conflicts in different sizes between two countries.
Many suggest the role of Moscow is very tricky. On the one hand, Moscow sells weapons to both countries, which might be used in the conflict. Secondly, Moscow now is calling for the ceasefire. And this is a story related to the leftover of the former Soviet Union. So help us to understand, Mr. Felgenhauer, what exactly is going on here?
Well, for Russia, the strategic long-term objective in the region is most likely to restore Soviet-time domination in Transcaucasia, which is seen as an essential part of Russian interests in the region, which means that Russia would want to have close relations with all three Transcaucasian nations, Georgia, Armenia and Azerbaijan. So Moscow was trying to balance its relations with Armenia and with the Azeris, with Baku, and trying to exclude other outside powers to have much influence in the region. This is a very complicated political juggle. It's also important to know that in Moscow there is a strong Armenian lobby. Armenians were prominent in Soviet times, in post-Soviet times, in the Russian bureaucracy, and today in business. And there's also, of course, the Azeri lobby that's also rather influential. And there are those who support in the Russian bureaucracy closer ties to Armenia, but also those who support closer ties to Azerbaijan. So all in all, of course, right now Moscow is saying there should be peace and everyone should calm down and stop firing. But if that's not happening, it's hard for Russia to move further. It's going to be quite a dilemma. Does Russia intervene with more force? That may trigger, say, a Turkish incursion into the conflict. It's a very dangerous situation.
It is a very dangerous situation, Mr. Felgenhauer. That's why I want to ask you, at this stage, which you mentioned a little bit earlier as well, how much weight does Russia's words still carry?
Well, of course, Russia has influence, but this conflict right now, though many in post-Soviet countries, from Kiev, I've heard that word, and from other places, and from Turkey, that believe that Russia is really to blame and somehow organized this flare-up. It's not so, and Russian influence is there, but it's to some extent limited.
All right.
This conflict right now is fed by local sources. There's internal problems, very serious, in Azerbaijan and in Armenia. A lot of public discontent. So a kind of more clashes on the ceasefire line could lead to a patriotic rallying of the public opinion in both Armenia and Azerbaijan, which is basically good for the governments there. So this is an internal kind of very much fueled flare-up where Moscow does not have so much a say. The problem is that this internally maybe fueled flare-up can get totally out of control, and we can get a regional war on our hands.
And that's the concern, isn't it, Mr. Kulesa? I mean, on the one hand, it could be local source leading to specifically this conflict, and yet all the onlookers are paying very close attention with very different agenda. For example, Russia, Turkey, and also the so-called the Minsk Group, which also includes the United States and some of the Western countries. Tell us, what about that at this stage?
If I were to describe the general moods, it's of course concerned, but primarily it is surprise. Simply with so many things on the plate for the major European countries and the United States. And you can start with Ukraine, then go to Syria, and then go to the migration crisis. Nobody seemed to pay that much attention to South Caucasus and Nagorno-Karabakh in particular. So right now there is a very nervous, I think, period in which everybody is first of all appealing for calm, but then trying to figure out how to put pressure on both the parties to de-escalate and to go to the ceasefire again.
The Minsk Group, there has been a lot of talk about it recently because it is a mechanism, and yet it hasn't really worked much for any of the conflict, because we understand since the collapse of former Soviet Union, the Minsk Group later was established, and yet it has not necessarily solved the hundreds of different sizes of conflicts on border among the former republics of the former Soviet Unions.
Yeah, now it looks like now almost every, all parties say that, okay, then, for everybody, okay, there will be no more conflict between two countries because it's out of the interest of all party, of course, except for the, announcement from Turkey.
It makes sense, but until the realities arise.
Yes, exactly. So of course now here is a Minsk Group. It looks like the mechanism to help the de-escalation of the situation. But another problem is, if we understand how it's a complicated situation there, maybe more pessimistic about the future. For example, how about this different, situation from past, especially. Now we do have the Ukrainian crisis, and still, very, very kind of a deadlock situation between U.S., Russia, and the European Union in the part of that region. And also, we mentioned the South Caucasus. South Caucasus used to be regarded as a very, very big resources for any kind of instability and conflicts. So now the problem is, once those one of these big players, they want to get something from this conflict, that there will be maybe further conflicts because it could be used by some big players.
How well have those border issues been discussed and resolved? In this case, there's only armistice. There's not specific final agreement. So what do you make of the reality, given this example of something happened between Armenia and Azerbaijan?
Well, the borders of the Soviet republics were drawn under Joseph Stalin rather artificially. No one believed that these borders will ever become real state borders, or that someone's going to be fighting on those to change them. They were kind of administrative borders, like between different American states. And when they transformed into state borders, that created lots of problems of divided people, of divided tribes. There's problems between Russia and Azerbaijan because there's a divided Lizgin people. There's many other kind of problems. Georgia and Russia. There's Armenian inhabited parts of Georgia also. And there's the Nakhichevan, there are different kind of enclaves. These borders can only function if it's a kind of very, very friendly relations when they are not that important. When they become important, that creates very serious problems in Central Asia too. These borders are almost unworkable in a kind of if they become international, and that has been creating problems all over the former Soviet Union, and there doesn't seem to be much of a let-up. There's this there's almost war between Russia and Ukraine. Of course, now there's the ceasefire in the Donbass, but still there's a confrontation.
How much danger are we going to see a repetition of what Ukraine was like before it ran into the biggest conflict? Is this region facing a danger of having another Ukraine? Also, given the fact that the Ukraine crisis has not been resolved at all, have we learned any lesson that we can help to, in a way, put things back into its track for this border conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan? Mr. Kulesa.
Well, in general, I would be rather careful to draw parallels between Ukraine and Nagorno-Karabakh. There are simply too many differences in terms of history, situation right now, and the potential implications. But interestingly, a lot of experts were predicting that Ukraine would end up, as Nagorno-Karabakh, would end up in a state of a conflict which is sometimes frozen, sometimes unfrozen. So it's very interesting that right now we're saying maybe Nagorno-Karabakh would end up as Ukraine. So I think in terms of the lessons learned is that there is no such a thing as a frozen conflict. If you just go for a ceasefire, then it may last for a month. It may even last for 22 years. But sooner or later, if you don't address the underlying causes of the problem, and if you don't push the sides which are there towards a lasting solution, then sooner or later we'll go back to the conflict. So I would say the lesson is that we should not be just happy with a ceasefire. And even if we go back to the situation before Friday in Nagorno-Karabakh, all sides should rethink their policy. We mentioned the Minsk Group. I'm not sure if having US, Russia, and France only is the best solution. Maybe we need something which includes European Union, Iran, and a couple of other players. So my general conclusion is that don't just go for the ceasefire. Think about the underlying causes of the crisis, both in Ukraine and in Azeri-Armenian relations.